of you for being here with us today. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn it over to the three of you.
All right. Well, I guess if we want to just go in order of things there, I can kick it off, and then we can go to Kaleb and then Taylor for questions. So, hey, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see everyone. And it's kind of fun being around in that. I was really pleasantly surprised to see that I know really well a vast majority of the participants here today. So, out or we'll get some tough questions. Either way will be good. So just to let me get my screens backed up here. Come on. Wanted to provide just a general overview about all right, I love it. And it says my Microsoft PowerPoint isn't responding, but so just in general, I should have taken one from Kaleb's book here with that in general, just a little bit about Kansas corn production is Kansas in 2020 produced just under 800 million bushels of corn, putting us the 6th largest corn producing state in the nation there. We do have in 2019, I'll try to share my screen one more time, and actually we're just gonna wing it here. In 2019 is kind of fun. We actually did surpass the state of Indiana in corn production. They had a dry year, we had a really wet year there, but then in normal conditions, they produce a lot more corn. In general, Kansas corn is made up of 2 different entities, the Kansas Corn Commission side and the Kansas Corn Growers Association. The commission side is the entity that when producers sell their bushel of corn at the first purchaser there, whether they be in state or out of state, a 1-cent assessment that is refundable is collected. And about 63% of those funds are used for domestic and foreign market development. Some of the domestic market development actions we do is we've since 2016 and started with a partnership with Kansas Department of Ag. We actually have a program that provides cost share funding for retailers to install blender pumps to offer higher blends of ethanol. It's kind of interesting. You look at where our corn goes in the state, about 1/3 of our corn directly goes to ethanol, 1/3 goes to livestock, and 1/3 gets exported out of the state. That 1/3 that obviously goes to ethanol, every bushel gets pulled off with high protein distillers grains as well. But so a big market is the ethanol market. And so, but we can't grow the market if consumers don't have access to it. So it's been a really successful program, sold a lot of gallons of ethanol that can show good investment for the checkoff dollars. Some examples of our foreign market development, partnerships with the U.S. Grains Council. Kansas Corn largely funds a position that's in India, focused on increasing ethanol imports from U.S. there. We do work through the Grains Council all throughout the world, but specifically in India and around Southeast Asia as well. And kind of finally, the last great program involved with Kansas Corn Commission that continues to grow is our education program. It's our Seed to STEM program there that just kind of started out small, but last year we reached 55,000 students. We trained teachers, pretty rigorous 2-day training sessions on just different parts of the corn cycle, and everything's all up to state standards, and all the way from, as you can imagine, some elementary level lessons to some of the more exciting projects is we provide distillation kits to junior high and high school students, and they're actually making ethanol in their junior high and high school science courses there. And then finally, the other side of our shop, the Kansas Corn Growers Association, by law, none of us commissions can lobby or be kind of advocates directly for policy. So we all respectively have association sides that are funded by voluntary grower memberships and other activities there. And we work a lot on state level issues, work together. I talk with Kaleb and Taylor several times a week, and their counterparts as we're doing some state level issues there. And on the national side, we have a presence, but a lot of that's based with our involvement with the National Corn Growers Association, that they've got offices just a few minute walk from the Capitol there. And some of the main policy things that we tend to hit on these days are more ethanol related policy and biofuels in general. Livestock things, livestock's an important user of corn there. And then obviously when Farm Bill is up, that tends to be good. We get heavily involved in trade, as you can imagine. And then something that is a continuation, I think all associations and commissions will there, is just making sure farmers have access to the technology that's allowing us to produce our crops efficiently. So whether that be re-registering of herbicides and other rules there. And then we're also a large sponsor of a lot of different water conservation and quality things. So that's kind of the general overview. Kansas corn. Sorry I had that hiccup with my PowerPoint, but we did. I think we'll get through it fine. I think I'll turn it over to Kaleb to talk to us about soybeans.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Josh. And thanks to Jody for having me on today. Having spent the last 10 years at the National Biodiesel Board in Jefferson City, Missouri, I haven't had the chance to talk to groups of K-Staters as often as I would like. So it's nice to be in good company today. So, many of the things that Josh touched on the corn side are set up very similar for soybeans. The Kansas Soybean Association does the policy work, while the Kansas Soybean Commission handles the checkoff dollars. So the soybean checkoff is a national program, so all farmers in the U.S. participate. They contribute 0.5% of the price they receive of that bushel of soybeans. And then it gets split in half. Half of it goes to our national group, the United Soybean Board. And then the other half stays here in Kansas. That United Soybean Board is run by 78 farmer directors who are actually appointed by the USDA secretary. Really, the main pieces are market development, building demand for soybean products, ensuring profitability for soybean farmers. And we do that in numerous ways. Just for some perspective, Kansas soybean production for 2020 totaled 190 million bushels. That was up 2% from 2019 across 4.7 million acres for an average yield of 40.5 bushels per acre. Historically, we are usually between 8th and 10th nationally as a state in soybean production. We basically trade places with the Dakotas anywhere from 10 to 8. So we're kind of right in that range behind a lot of the I states. Big issues for us that both get work on the policy side from the association and on the checkoff research education side include the farm economy, supporting the livestock industry, biodiesel, international trade issues, infrastructure, and then one that's really hot right now is conservation and sustainability. So some of those big factors, with the new Biden administration coming in, being really heavily focused on the environmental side, there are some really great opportunities for farmers, whether soybean, corn, wheat, whatever it may be. There are a lot of really great opportunities for some, kind of voluntary, incentive-based type policies that really, reward those early adopters, because, in many of the conversations we've had with all the different organizations who are trying to tackle this issue, farmers are really the early adopters, and they're the original conservationists, as it was said by somebody else that I've heard on our recent webinar. But so really what we're trying to do kind of in that space is making sure that it's not restrictive to what farmers are doing, and basically that farmers can be part of the solution versus part of the problem on that side of things. So that's a big effort in Washington, D.C. and on the local level as well. So some of the commission work, the research is really that we support really focuses on things like soybean genetics, pest management, disease, soil health, and most of that project work is actually done at Kansas State. But the Soybean Commission does support other research through some other avenues. There's some really interesting stuff going on at Pittsburgh State University on kind of the soybean oil side of things, of what can be done with it. Soybean oil is really diverse and really versatile. And basically anything that is made with petroleum can be replaced with soybean oil in some form or another. So whether that's obviously biodiesel is the most prominent, on the fuel side, replacing diesel fuel, but things like tires and styrofoam and paints and carpet backings and asphalt, even all those things, the petroleum in all those products can be replaced with soybean oil. And a lot of that research to prove that that can be done and show how that can be done was done, through the soybean checkoff and through those advancements. So kind of that industrial use is a big market development area that the soybean checkoff has been a part of. And then again, also very much like corn, the domestic livestock industry is vital to soybeans and to the soybean industry. So essentially soybeans get either shipped whole overseas, or they stay here and they're processed in the United States into meal and oil, oil into some food and those industrial uses I mentioned, but then, vast majority of that meal goes to feed livestock. So that's a huge part of what we do, is really just supporting our partners in the livestock industry. And then kind of the last little bit of unique piece to kind of show where soybeans are headed and what they could be. Every year, the Kansas Soybean Commission puts on a yield contest for soybean farmers to enter. And so just to basically see, what production practices, what research, what could the potential be for increasing productivity of soybeans. And, I mentioned last year's statewide average for soybeans was about 40.5 bushels per acre. This year's yield contest winner on a 5-acre plot saw a record yield of 114.3 bushels per acre. It's almost 3 times the state average in this case. So, while that's, again, it's a small sample size, and it is a contest to kind of try to drive some advancements and drive some incentive, but it does show what the trend line is for increasing yields in soybeans, and kind of what that productivity could look like in the years to come for the 15,000 or so soybean growers here in the state of Kansas. So I'll stop there, and as mentioned in the chat, would love to hear questions, but I think at this point I'll kick it over to Taylor for a little bit more.
All right, thank you. And I'll try to share my screen. How's that looking? Can everybody see it? I got a thumbs up, so.
Looks good.
All right, cool. So I want to talk a little bit about historically where we've come from here. So the Kansas Wheat Commission, the origins of it really date back to like right after World War II, when farmers in Western Kansas were really interested in trying to help the rebuild efforts over in Europe. So they organized their national and state wheat organizations, and were able to establish the Kansas Wheat Commission in 1957 through the Kansas Wheat Act, which established the wheat checkoff. Other commodities soon followed, and that Kansas Wheat Act became the Commodities Grain Act. So the commission is a farmer-funded entity with 2 cents of every bushel of wheat sold in Kansas collected at the first point of sale. Typically, that's the elevators funding the organization. Then we use that funding on our statutory mission of education, research, and promotion. So we work to increase domestic production through consumer education programs like the National Festival of Breads, and we work through national organizations like the Wheat Foods Council and eatwheat.org. We also fund research projects at Kansas State University and do double haploid research in our building through our private company, Heartland Plant Innovation. And then with 50% of our crop going towards exports, we also work through U.S. Wheat Associates to promote Kansas wheat in our international markets. Now, similar to the other organizations, we are a dual organization, Kansas Wheat is, with the commission and the association. So the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers is a nonprofit, dues-funded policy organization that works to give our farmers a strong voice on policy issues. We work on a very broad set of issues along with our National Association of Wheat Growers, which we are the largest dues paying member. And we work on a very broad variety of issues, which is includes, but is definitely not limited to, state and federal tax policy, the Farm Bill, environmental regulations, and trade policy. So let's look a little bit about the wheat crop this year. We're at about 7.3 million planted acres, which actually is an increase from last year, but it is still a bottom 5 all-time planted wheat acreage. I do think that we are getting close to the bottom of the barrel. Last year was a historic low, but I think we are seeing about the minimum amount of acreage that it will possibly be grown here in Kansas. So the chart on the right kind of shows a breakdown of winter wheat acres across the country. We are the #1 winter wheat producing state. We make up about 1/3 of that entire pie. We're 2.5 million acres more than the second largest grower, which is Texas. The other thing is make up about 1/5 of all wheat produced in the U.S. And we're either 1 or 2 with North Dakota. It kind of varies year to year. We're also one of the largest wheat milling, flour milling capacity with 10 mills that produce 114,000 hundredweight of flour each day, which is enough to produce 110 million loaves of bread each day. So we have our bases covered on all that. I'll kind of leave it there. That was pretty brief. If anybody has any more specific questions, I'd be more than happy to take those. My contact information is there on the screen. So whenever Jody wants me to stop sharing, I can do that as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm up for anything. So are you guys open for questions now? Okay, perfect. So I'll invite the rest of the audience. You can either unmute and chime in appropriately or throw it in the chat. And I'll try and repeat those for our speakers. Let's just pick one here to get started. There's been some buzzwords about soil carbon sequestration. Have you guys run into any of that in your respective areas?
I haven't seen it.
Taylor's being real facetious. They've been having a lot of good times, especially at the national side on that. I can take off on that. That does kind of seem to be a buzzword or there. Obviously, soil carbon sequestration is nothing new to any of our crops grown here, especially with modern farming practices and that. We're seeing these typical farms are seeing carbon levels continue to increase. It's been really neat. Can speak a little from the corn side there, the research looking at that sequestration that's happening at the crop production side, and then drawing that into the end uses to really look at how much more effective our markets or our end products are that. There's some neat stuff in the ethanol world where potential for getting additional credits for ethanol grown with certified kind of low carbon corn or even grain sorghum there. So there's some really good potentials out there. On the flip side of that, I think something we all have to keep in mind and be mindful of our members that are out there is one, that it is voluntary, and then to watch that this isn't some type of, because there's a lot of companies out there doing this as well, and just making sure our members are protected and getting payments, fair payments there, because there's crazy numbers thrown out there. Carbon, I do a lot of work with the state of California and their low carbon fuel standard. And I mean, carbon's capped, it's trading at $200 a ton right now. And sometimes these figures I see for farmers getting paid, it's in the $5 to $10 a ton rate for carbon. So we have to, make sure we're protected, but something that we need to be at the table for. And I think all our organizations are to ensure ag is represented. Kaleb or Taylor, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, I can jump in really quick. From a wheat perspective, carbon is a really touchy subject. just because in most cases, not just in Kansas, but across the country, where we talk carbon, it's a lot of cover crop issues, and wheat country just can't grow them for the most part. So what we try to do is really trying to change the conversation over to a conservation topic. So wheat does very good on soil conservation. We've done very good on energy. We've done very good on water. We've done very good on reducing inputs and things like that. We're at the head of no-till. So when we go into these more climate change topics and policies, we try to steer the conversation a little more towards carbon or towards away from carbon and towards conservation, because at the end of the day, if carbon is going to be the ultimate goal, then it's going to come down to cover crops. And that's just not something that's going to be favorable to wheat. And I think we can tell a much better story through our other benefits to the environment.
Yeah, and I'd just add in there too, it's really interesting that, the conversation is so red hot right now. But as Josh mentioned, we've been doing the science behind biofuels and the carbon reduction of that product for 20 years. So we've got great data on that. We know how those markets work. It's actually working in California and through the renewable fuel standard. And then it's just so different, and so far the science just isn't quite caught up yet on, what can different soil types store, what do different practices, how does that affect how much carbon stored in the ground? What have people been doing, reduced tillage or no-till for 20 years in some cases? How does the market react to that and reward that essentially? And then it almost seems like it's almost arbitrary dollar amounts, that some of these private companies are paying farmers right now. And it's really just a huge unknown, I think. Is the government going to mandate it from a federal side? Is it all going to be, these individual market players? So it's a really, really interesting space to keep an eye on here in the immediate future.
Yeah,
Excellent.
absolutely.
Go ahead, Josh.
Guy asked a couple questions here, Jody. That kind of talking a little bit about different shifts in planted acreage there, and seeing if I don't know, it'd be interesting as planting intentions come out, kind of where corn and beans and grain sorghum shuffle out. Obviously all the wheat for this marketing year has been planted already. There's lots of interesting things going place. Obviously China has just exploded buying all of our commodities, but probably especially on the grain sorghum side, if you look at them in terms of percent. So these basis levels are more than flipped from what we've seen. So I think that and some drier weather is going to bring a lot of grain sorghum into some of the drier area of the state. That'll be interesting. But I think we're at a good potential right now for producers to really market with some decent prices, and should be able to lock in prices above the cost of the production. So that would be there. You guys have anything else to add on acreages? I will mention too, through that, as I always say from that, I'm sorry, Taylor, you just unmuted, is I work for Kansas Corn. That's where my day job is. But as a farmer, I'm not a corn farmer. There's no such thing as a corn farmer in the state. So at any given time, how we do, we look at markets, with my farmer hat on. But at any given time, a third of my acreage is with each one of these commodities today. With beans and corn and wheat. And so that's how it works for us agronomically, sustainably, all that there. And so that's kind of more with where I tend to plant from, and I know others are on that shift and might shift a little there, but it's tended to work for us. That difference I get in corn yield after it's been put into wheat stubble, it's phenomenal. And so that's something when you look into that, when you look at our farm as a full system instead of just pinpointing down on 1 acre. So that's that. Sorry about that. Taylor, go ahead, talk about acres.
Oh, I was just going to mention, we've seen with quite a bit of increased rainfall out in southwest Kansas over the last few years. We saw a lot of our typical wheat acres move towards dryland corn and even some soybeans. And I think as things get a little bit drier, now we're seeing some really significant drought, especially in that western third of the state. I think some of those acres start to come back, and we saw that with a little bit of bump in acreage this year. There's definitely a lot of improvements that are coming through wheat, seed genetics, both on corn, soybeans, that make it more viable out there. But I do think that dryland corn in the western third may or may not be viable over these next few years as we get drier.
Yeah, and I'd just add a little too on the trade side, as I saw that was a question in there as well. Obviously, China's the big player in the market space, and the quantities they've been buying here recently have made a huge impact. So American Soybean Association, one of their absolute top trade priorities is just keeping super close eye and keeping engaged with U.S.-China trade issues, just to make sure that those agreements get held to, and they keep up their end of the bargain on that. But with the trade tariff situation over the last couple of years, the industry has worked really hard to diversify that trade portfolio. We export a lot of soybeans to a lot of other countries, but China still is the number one buyer in the world. So maintaining that, as well as trying to grow and diversify. Mexico actually has really picked up speed on the soybean exports, whole beans, meal, and oil even, as their livestock markets grow and logistics get easier and easier to get soybean products there. But we've seen growth in in Middle Eastern countries, Egypt, Africa. Really, U.S. soybeans are a global commodity.
Taylor, there's a question on, there you go.
Yeah, I saw there's a question on wheat and what we're doing to try to grow markets. So a couple things. Last year was a pretty big year as far as exports are concerned. We're right on pace with those. We just haven't seen quite the huge jump that corn and soybeans have. China plays a big part in that, but a few things on what we've been trying to do. So Cuba is a big focus for us. Now that we've seen a change in administration, there's some optimism that there will be some rollbacks on Cuba policy. Now, however, the big issue is that there will still need to be some congressional action, as during the Obama administration, we sold 0 vessels of wheat into Cuba. Cuba could be a pretty big market. It makes a lot of sense from a logistics standpoint. So that's a big focus for us. Africa is something that gets a lot of buzz in the administration. They like to talk about it. The big issue for wheat there will be that if they're a price buyer, it's pretty difficult to get into with Black Sea wheat just being able to outcompete us on price almost across the board, both from a logistics standpoint and from a quality standpoint. We have a much higher quality. That's a big portion that we focus on, is really trying to make sure that we are growing the highest quality to get incentives out for our guys to grow the highest quality, so that we can get our bakers and millers in foreign countries to really buy into wanting to pay that little bit higher premium for our better wheat. Another big thing that we're focused on is Brazil. Brazil, while it's a competitor for both corn and soybeans, they're a pretty big wheat importer. We got a tariff rate quota that opened up about 15 months ago. That's a pretty big market that we're putting a lot of work into. Nigeria is a big buyer of hard white wheat. That's a newer market that we've seen over the last year. And a relatively new one as well is aquaculture. So South America and even in Asia, in shrimp production, as well as some other aquaculture producers, are really going to feed wheat. So we saw a couple boats going into Ecuador this last week. And that's a new market that we're really trying to open up. U.S. Wheat Associates has done a lot of good work on the ground trying to explore some of these new markets. And another big thing that we're really focused on with U.S. Wheat Associates is just trying to keep people accountable to their WTO obligations. Places like India, places like China, places like Brazil that just do not live up to their obligations, that are subsidizing at an unfair rate, that are dumping wheat onto the market. China's one of the largest consumers of wheat in the world. They take up about 1/5 of all consumption, and that is up this year. And they're expected to have the largest imports in 25 years. So making sure that they are playing by the rules so that we have a fair shake at that, that's pretty important for us as well.
I'd just say filling in one last kind of set on the trade aspect to highlight it's, always great to promote, our grain exports, and specifically whole grain, whole kernel corn's good, but I have my money would be, I'd love to be at the pot when we're not exporting any whole kernel corn. I'd love to export it via protein as animals and as ethanols or distillers grain there. That really seems to be where that bang is, and that's really been a great thing, partnering with a lot of the U.S. Meat Export Federation, and then Kansas Corn. We're actually fairly new members in with Soybeans has been involved with this organization a long time, but the U.S. Poultry and Egg Export Council, USAPEC, there, because believe it or not, the largest consumer of corn worldwide as a category is poultry and egg production there. When you're sitting in the middle of Kansas, it's hard to see that, but when you look at this worldwide, so it's important to really look out and make sure things are good for where our uses are.
And while Josh is catching up on the question for him in the chat, I think aquaculture is a really cool space. And since Taylor talked about it, and it's a question for Josh too, there are basically, as the world population grows and as certain populous countries grow in affluence, their demand for protein is growing exponentially. So basically, as quick as we can grow it, as fast as we can get it to them, they're demanding more protein around the world. So that, is in all forms. And actually aquaculture and basically fish farming is one of the most efficient ways to feed grains and grow protein to feed people. So that's been a huge growing market, especially on the soybean side, as well as the other commodities. So, and it's really, they're really very distinct, different markets in different parts of the world, but some are very industrialized and basically have feeding systems like a traditional beef cattle feedlot, and then some are really basic, really rudimentary, almost just open ponds and feeding fish that way. So it's really unique. It's really growing, and I think it's one of the markets I've been the most surprised to learn about on the soybean side.
Yeah, it's been really neat to see that technology advance. The protein levels they're getting out of soy meal these days, as well as the distillers grain on the back end ethanol. Actually, when I was with the Department of Ag, I had kind of an ex officio seat on all the commissions, and specifically, I remember on the soybean side, Kansas Soybeans was helping fund a project. They were raising a tuna out in these big pens in the middle of the ocean, and man, I sure wanted to volunteer to go look and make sure the soy checkoff dollars were doing well there. But some really neat things on some super high protein soy meal they're feeding the tuna. Anything else?
Yeah, so there's been a couple that have come.
You got something?
What's that?
Oh, go ahead. What do you got for us, Jody?
Yeah, there's been a couple questions that have come directly to me. So one, actually, I'll just start with the first one and then you can talk about it and I'll jump in with another one. Do any of you have the ability to talk about a high level update as it relates to Milo?
So I can take first stab at that. Obviously, Kansas grain sorghum production, it's been kind of steady. It seems to be around 250 million bushels around in there to 275. It's peaked at a little more. So it's a smaller crop in terms of bushels produced. with other commodities there, but it is absolutely, I mean, Kansas is just far and above the #1 producer of grain sorghum, sometime hovering around that 60% level. And that a lot of times grain sorghum traditionally gets included in a lot of feed diets, and especially in our Western Kansas based ethanol plants. You know, we've got plants out there that run almost solely on a milo. That is flipped with that price ratio there, and China is just absolutely bought it up for their domestic feed and some other areas there. They got some neat things. The craft liquor baijiu market's a big potential and continues to grow for grain sorghum there as well. So that's that. And that's another commodity organization Jesse and Adam work with several times a week as we kind of partner on a lot of different things on policy matters.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, another one here for you. Most commodity groups at a national level are setting crop-specific sustainability goals in response to consumer and supply chain demands. How are each of your 3 groups looking at supporting these goals at a state level?
Oh, man. That's a good one. I'll just let Kaleb take it. No, let the new guy take it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
No, well, so it really is a complex issue, and there are so many layers to it. And you know, we just spent so the American Soybean Association goes through annually with their boards and their stakeholders, and sets their policy resolutions process. You know, and they've got, you know, 80 some pages of policies and policy resolutions. And I mean, the absolute most time that we spent on it here this March was talking about the issues of sustainability and agriculture and farming. And I think probably the exciting piece and the challenge of all of it is that it is there's so much overlap. So, you know, like Josh said, there aren't corn farmers, there aren't soybean farmers, there aren't wheat farmers, there are farmers that grow all these commodities. So the exciting thing is that all of these challenges are being addressed by each of these individual groups. But it does make it challenging, because then, you know, you can get a little bit siloed and get a little bit focused on your one specific area. But the good thing is that the way the state commodity groups are structured in our associations are directly tied in, directly plugged into the national groups, who are really leading on the policy discussions, and especially on the sustainability pieces, because, you know, from whether it's conservation, whether it's sustainable practices, if it's programs at USDA, crop insurance, just the whole gamut, you know, it's really, really impacted by federal policy. So, you know, our approach, Kansas Soybeans approach, has always been, you know, basically remove barriers that keep farmers from doing what they need to do, and then put things in place that help us get to what we need to do. And, you know, with that in mind, sustainability is basically just one other issue that we're trying to work through for farmers.
Yeah, I think Kaleb kind of summed it up probably pretty nicely for what both Josh or I could say. We work really closely with our national organization. We have a lot of input in what they say. We also, it's worth noting that with wheat going largely towards flour mills and direct human consumption, a lot of our flour mills and baking companies and whatnot, they're really looking for this too. And so, for instance, Graincraft has put out their preferred variety program, trying to encourage people to grow it more sustainably, trying to encourage their farmers to grow specific varieties that are increased in quality, things like that. And so we work really closely with both the private companies and trying to formulate game plans and trying to see how we can connect producers that are doing these things already with those private companies, as well as then working with that national association to try to set national policy and try to work and try to get wheat's story out there.
That's good. And just one specific thing I'd like to bring up real quick, that Kansas Corn has been looking we're actually partner in a pilot project that's centered around Northwest Kansas, specifically Western Plains Energy out in Oakley, and have applied and are working with a USDA program out there to closely really monitor what carbon sequestration is over a multi-year time frame on these farms. And what'll be really neat is we're gonna, as I kind of alluded to earlier, gonna certify this is what the carbon level or carbon score of that corn, and then a lot of grain sorghum goes into that plant as well. This is what that is, and then this is what it does to the carbon intensity of the biofuels in the end. And so something that will keep this away from being real commodity specific, since this is a USDA pilot project, it's on the farm level, not commodity specific. And if we're doing this as a 5-6 year program, you know, corn might only be 1 or 2 years of that rotation as we get out there. So it really is, it's pinpointing this down, looking at what those farm level sustainability pieces are. So there's more alignment then, because I can see it. You know, you see these different groups, whether all the way from the animal side to that, with these different sustainability scores. And we know a lot of times it's the same person that can be producing all of those commodities and in a base. So it's an important thing to look at. So that was a good question.
Yep, definitely. And I would add one other small piece too that Taylor kind of spurred a thought to is, you know, a lot of the efforts are broad and high level, but you know, there are some specific initiatives, you know, that get down to the customer base or to the consumer base. So, you know, on the soybean side, the European Energy Directive, their basically national biofuels policy is more specific, and because a lot more of their biofuels are imported, they have a little tighter restrictions, whereas, you know, our production here is much different. So there are some, you know, sustainably branded soy marks and those kinds of things, and those types of programs to basically show that, hey, it's here from the United States, so it's a very sustainable product. So there's, again, lots of levels to that issue, but great question.
Awesome, thank you. Before I ask another question, I want to make sure that there's, if there's any other questions still out there, now is a great time to throw them in. I guess as they're doing that, I can ask one last question here. So as far as trade policy goes, have there been any new or I guess past ones that you have updates on that you trade policy specific that you might want to highlight for our audience today?
I can take a stab at that one real quick. Both the EU and the UK are pretty hot topics right now. They reached 4-month agreements to set aside retaliatory tariffs while they try to work on solutions. My guess is that there's like 0% chance that gets done within the time frame, especially if we're all doing this via Zoom. It's going to be relatively difficult, but it's a really good start, and I know the administration would really like to move past that. I mentioned Cuba, WTO, that's a pretty interesting one. Biden has continued the Trump's policy of blocking appointments to the WTO's appellate body. That appellate body is the enforcement mechanism through the WTO. So they're trying to get reforms done on how the WTO really enforces trade negotiations and trade agreements. It's kind of unclear what it's going to take to get them to lift those blockages of appointments, but that's something that we, as well as U.S. Wheat Associates, is really working hard to try to figure out, is what reforms does the United States want to see before they'll allow those appointments to go through. One more thing, so we always look at the market access program and the foreign market development programs. Those are funding through Farm Bill that really work towards getting new markets open for really all the commodities. We've had several success stories with wheat specifically, looking at Brazil, even looking at China. Some money went into there to try to get some of those reforms done. But a big one is the Trade Promotion Authority. That's the fast track program that gets any trade agreements through Congress a little bit quicker. It sets timelines up and we know Congress works best on deadlines. So if Trade Promotion Authority doesn't get reauthorized, I think that expires in June. It's unclear what actual issues that will bring up, but we could have stuff sitting there for way longer than what we'd like when we eventually get the United Kingdom, when we eventually get the European Union to agree on some sort of deal. So those are really the big legislative priorities I think we are looking at, is that market access program, foreign market development, making sure Congress understands the need for those, and then reauthorizing that Trade Promotion Authority.
I'd say could ditto about everything there. You know, some specific things. It's kind of ironic. I think probably what we'll see is the thing that Biden and Trump will be the most alike on is some of how they go about trade policy, maybe for different reasons, but with the same result. It's absolutely fascinating through that. You know, it would be great to get back into, for all our commodities, to be able to get back in the fray of the TPP or the Trans-Pacific Partnership there. I know there's been some great headways with all our commodities, with specifically with Japan, which is the largest member of that pact, but it would be great to go through that, but that continues to evolve there. A couple of other pieces there. I think there's, you know, Africa's out there. There's just a booming population in Southeast Asia as well. You know, the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, also very important things, especially as they're increasing their animal agriculture. So very, very great for the commodities. And then looks like we're going to have to go back. Unfortunately, seeing a lot of unfriendly rhetoric, specifically out of the Mexican government these days. And we're going to have to go back and do some rechecking and retuning to make sure USMCA is held up. But I think we've seen that with the recent appointment of Catherine Tai as USTR representative. She got a unanimous vote in the Senate. I mean, how does that happen in this day and age? So I think we've got some under the Biden administration liking who they've gotten in place in that. I just hope she can. I've had the chance to be on some webinars with her. I've not met her, obviously, but she seems to be like a go-getter. So she just needs to make sure she garners a lot of attention, I would say, to become a bigger priority in the administration. Kaleb, what do you have?
Yeah, you know, these guys nailed it on trade, so nothing else for me on that one.
I'll try to answer Guy's question here. Guy asked whether or not
he's baiting us here. Good job, Guy.
Yeah, Guy is asking whether or not the WTO has outlived its usefulness, and I think it's a really fascinating question. I think if you look worldwide, I think there's a lot of hesitancy across the board in Europe as well, with the UK and their Brexit vote. There's a lot of hesitancy to buy into international organizations right now. I think we've seen that with the COVID pandemic, with the WHO. I think that's something that everybody is kind of wondering about, with a lot of populism moving back towards nationalism rather than globalism. There's a lot of isms in there, sorry. But I think the WTO has to have some sort of place. And I do think that there was, you're right on the money with the anti-US sentiment that the US had been feeling in the WTO. And not just in the WTO, but the United Nations and as well. I think there's a real argument to be made that certain population groups think that it has outlived its usefulness. I still tend to believe that we need an organization to come and negotiate. But Dr. Flinchbaugh always said that the biggest amount of power that the WTO had was the amount of power that everybody else was willing to give them. So if you're not willing to play by their rules, it kind of renders them inadequate. And that's the bottom line, is as long as individual countries are willing to give up their sovereignties to an international organization that way, then it's effective. And if they're not, then it's ineffective. And I don't really know what the big philosophical answer to that question is, but I have to believe that there's some role for it, whether or not that changes moving forward and how we fix it. That's a bigger question, and I don't get paid enough to answer it.
Yeah, I think that's good. I wouldn't, if you said build something from scratch that that where countries can come together on terms, it wouldn't look anything like the WTO, if you ask my opinion. But as kind of the unfortunate thing when you work in this political policy realm, you have to deal with the kind of these guardrails that you have, because it's just the feasibility of being able to completely start from scratch just isn't there, with the buy-in and a lot of politics and just how elections change ideology, sometimes overnight. So lots of other issues there that kind of might make it something that, while it might not be an effective tool anymore, it's something that we do have and continue to look at what our influences are. And in this case, unfortunately, it's kind of more of a putting up some additional barriers. Kaleb?
Well, see, thanks again. You guys nailed it. So I didn't have to
all right, we'll let you go first in the next one.
To contribute to Taylor's isms, I'm so glad you threw in a Barry Flinchpaw ism right there. That was really great to hear. Do we have any final questions before we wrap up? Okay, I will get their contact information thrown up here. So I'll go ahead and let everybody take a look at that while I thank the three of you for joining us today. So thank you for all of your insights, the time you put into putting together your presentations today. And hopefully our audience kind of stretched you a little bit and help you push forward with that. So with that, couple of things for everyone here in the audience. We would love to connect with you through our social media channels. Our students and alumni are very active on our channels, so it is a great way to start meeting others who have done the MAB program. We would love to hear more about what drew your interest to the MAB program and talk through how we might be a great fit for you. You can visit our website at mab.ksu.edu and choose a time that works for you. We can go through some of the questions mentioned here, as well as do a lot of listening about where you want to be in the future. If you know that we are the program for you, start an application. If you sign up for and complete an advising appointment, we will send you a code to waive the application fee. And with that, once again, thank you all for joining us. Let us know how we can help you as you move forward, and wish you all the best. We'll talk again soon.